A federal judge has blocked President Trump's effort to control the price of prescription drugs. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, we just did a show about this recently, about how President Trump's administration has decided to require drug makers to advertise the prices of their medications to consumers. And anything more than, I think it was $35 a month or something like that, had to be disclosed. Well, a U.S. District Court of Appeals judge, I want to get the judge's name correct. I believe it's Amit Mehta. I'm going to get the right court. United States District Court in the District of Columbia, Amit Mehta, ruled that the Department of Health and Human Services exceeded its regulatory authority when it sought to make all drug makers reveal their prices like that, or at least prescription drug makers. Bill, just first of all, on the face of it, we talked about this as possibly the way that President Trump could execute a repeal and replace strategy without going directly through Congress. And now it seems like this federal judge is saying, no, you can't do that without going directly through Congress. I want to fill in more details as we go on. So I just want to let you know that in advance, because right now there are things I'm not saying about it that you'll want to reflect upon. But on the face of it, what do you think about a judge stopping this effort by the Trump administration?
I don't know when this started. I don't have much memory of it before Donald Trump's presidency, but I mean, federal judge decides that the border wall can't be built. Federal judge decides that this particular piece of diplomacy can't happen. Federal judge decides this. Federal judge decides that. It's not even the Supreme Court, which really, as you know, Scott, in your mild-mannered reporter disguise, but underneath being a constitutional Superman that you are, you know that the Supreme Court was never designed to basically say whether a law is okay or not. That was fully the job of the Congress, and if the law was unconstitutional, then it was up to the American people to chuck it away.
Well, in this case, the drug company sued the Trump administration and said that the Trump administration did not have the constitutional authority to do what it was doing. And in this case, the judge at the appeals court agreed.
Okay, so I'm going to just have to find some way to understand this new world that we live in. A fair amount of Obamacare was passed using executive order. Certainly, its delays and implementation was delayed by executive order several times. So apparently, it's okay to change a sixth of the economy by executive order, but then having drug companies actually disclose what they're actually charging for their product, all of a sudden now is just the just one short step away from tyranny. Then fine. Make it a federal case, Mr. President. Make it a federal case. I am a private enterprise champion. I believe completely in private enterprise. I believe that companies have a right to charge whatever they want to for this stuff. Absolutely. And if they want to charge $10,000 a pill, that's their business, and I don't have any problem with that whatsoever.
Well, this is why I think you'd be in favor of this.
But hang on. But to say that not only are they not advertising their prices, but that it's impossible to find out what they are, does not strike me as a particularly free market situation.
Well, the reason I thought you might be in favor of the judge's actions here is because he's basically saying the big bad government can't tell a private business what to do, what it must advertise in its ads. The other thing is the judge clearly here is narrowing the focus of his decision. He did not make a ruling on a First Amendment case, so he's not saying anything about freedom of speech. He did not make a ruling about the wisdom of the Trump administration's strategy of making drug prices public knowledge. And in fact, he said that it's possible that could force down the price of pharmaceuticals. He just ruled on the narrow issue of whether the Health and Human Services Department has the authority, absent a congressional law, to make that decision. And Bill, you're always complaining on the conservative side of things about regulatory agencies assuming congressional powers and essentially making laws.
No, you're absolutely right. And from the moment you read the headline, I looked at the story as the way I would look as a Florida Gator fan, it's like watching Florida State play Georgia. Is there any way they can both lose? Is that possible? Is there some way that we can figure this out for them both to lose? So it's clash of the evil titans, right? It's a judge making a ruling, stopping the president's policy on one hand, and on the other hand, it's an executive order, which shouldn't be happening anyway. So on some level, if somebody's going to say, no, you need to go to Congress for that, that's not within the purview of executive orders, I think that's appropriate and good if it's universally applied. But at the same time, this idea that federal judges can simply just, and this isn't the Supreme Court, this is some guy on a circuit court. Some guy on any number of the circuit courts in this country can make a ruling that affects the national level. I don't think so. I'm willing to concede that something that the Supreme Court made a ruling on could conceivably be willing to do that. I'll have that conversation.
You have a rather modern view of the Supreme Court, because back in the beginning, the Supreme Court justices were actually circuit riders themselves, and they would go out and hear cases and rule on an individual level in those cases. And eventually something could get escalated to that, en banc group, basically, where you have to present your case to the whole court. This is typically the way federal judges operate, in usually as individuals or in 3-judge panels. But I find the curious thing here is what you just highlighted. It's this clash between the idea that we need to get the federal government out of the business of directing the nation's healthcare on the one hand, and on the other hand, a judge who's probably no friend of the Trump administration's politics basically saying, hey, look, you got to do this constitutionally. You got to get it done by law through Congress.
Which sets up another clash of the Titans' moral struggle. So look, I hate executive orders, and I hate the idea that a circuit judge whose jurisdiction is not the entire United States of America is making a ruling that affects the entire country. It's a federal ruling, needs to be made. If such a thing is even up for discussion, needs to be made by the Supreme Court. I don't like the idea that a guy who's adjudicating traffic tickets here in Van Nuys can make a decision on something, and then all of a sudden the United States has to grind to a halt because some judge somewhere decided to make a ruling on something. So if he is a member of a circuit court, I don't see how he has any jurisdictional right to make this kind of thing. But nevertheless, yes, executive orders I am against. Yes, judges making these kind of rulings I'm against.
But you're in favor of Congress making law.
But now we are up against the second of the sort of the higher level of this conflict of nastiness. If it were possible for there to be a return to constitutional law, needless to say, I'm the first person in favor of it. Absolutely, I am the first person in favor of it. I have said from the beginning that executive orders were never meant for this. But my concern is this. My concern is that executive orders get written by one team and no one blocks them. And then when the other team tries to write executive orders, because the first team has gone around Congress, now all of a sudden they get blocked. So I'm dealing with this fact that, yes, I agree that executive orders should not be legislation. But at the same time, what I'm also seeing is that executive orders become legislation if you're on the blue team, but they're blocked if you're on the red team. And that is something else I find catastrophically dangerous. So I'm going to just go outside and hang myself, I think.
So the drug companies are arguing before the court a couple of things. Number one, they said that there's a First Amendment case, and the judge refused to rule on the First Amendment case. Secondly, the drug companies said, among other things, that if they had to say the price of the drugs, some people might stop taking drugs because they think that they're more expensive than they are. But because, in fact, they're not paying for the full price of those drugs because they have insurance. And the judge didn't rule on that aspect of it. So there are several things here that the drug companies wanted that they didn't get from the judge, and they just got this narrow ruling that said the Health and Human Services Department doesn't have the power to do something that only Congress does. So if you're among the legal minds in the Trump administration, how do you pursue this going forward?
Well, I don't want to answer this as one of the legal minds in the Trump administration, and I certainly don't want to answer it as one of the legal minds in the United States, because I'm not a lawyer, and therefore I have a reasonably decent understanding of the law. I want to just answer this as an American citizen who can read English sentences. This is not a terribly tough thing to do. My understanding of the law of this country as it applies to this case as a citizen would be to say, yes, I agree that presidential executive orders need to be reined in, that if something has to happen legislatively, we have an entire branch of Congress called the legislature, and that's their job. So to the degree that we are dealing with the executive order aspect of it, then I think, yes, he's got a case in terms of that ruling. I would just like to see it applied to all executive orders, not just the ones coming from Republicans. But on the larger issue, the question of whether or not this information should be disclosed or not works for me like this. As a free citizen in a free country who's participating in the free market, I am paying for stuff, and I don't know what it costs. It's not like I am absent from this transaction. I am essentially, well, I'm not required by law now, but it certainly prior to Obamacare is required, at least by common sense, to have health insurance, which means that I'm writing a sizable check every month, and the check is being written to people who will not tell me what the price of what I'm paying for is. So I have a problem with that, and I don't think that that's a particularly out on a wild fringe limb to be on, Scott. If somebody wants to charge me for a product, and then they don't want to tell me how much the product is, but the law demands I've got to pay it anyway, I got a problem with that.
Bill, don't you think that conservatism is ultimately a failed ideology for this reason? Not because of necessarily that anything that you believe is incorrect, but because fundamentally, if you believe in smaller government, if you believe in a less powerful executive, if you believe in reining in federal overreach, when your guys get in charge, you essentially want them to go and reduce their own power. And if they reduce their own power, then they'll be limited in their ability to roll back the things that the other guys did when they were in power. Doesn't it just seem like a fruitless battle?
Well, life is a fruitless battle, Scott. I mean, life is a small pocket of reverse entropy. It's powered by sunlight, but it's a very little eddy in the universe where things get more complex, and entropy is on the side of the progressives. It is easier to not do something than it is to do it. It's easier not to mow the lawn than it is to mow the lawn. And the thing about mowing the lawn is, if you mow the lawn, the grass doesn't stop growing. You got to mow the lawn again. And since you bring it up, what I very recently thought something really remarkable about this. Most of the people who watch this show, needless to say, are extremely well-educated patriots and damn fine-looking ones too, I might add. But this idea of the myth of Sisyphus, the idea that this man is tortured by waking up in the morning and having this enormous physical labor, just actual back-breaking hard work of rolling this boulder up to the top of the hill. And then at the end of the day, he's got the boulder up on the hill. He comes back home, goes to bed. When he wakes up in the morning, there's the boulder, and he has to do it again. When we think about this myth, the lesson that we take from it is that there is some kind of work that has to be done on a regular basis. That some things just reset themselves, like mowing the lawn, or rust never sleeps, and all the rest of it. So the obvious lesson about this myth is that some things you just have to do again and again and again and again and again, because that's how the world works. But recently I had a thought that I think is really interesting. And that thought is, what is it that makes Sisyphus do this? In other words, we know that the task is futile to the degree that you have to do it again. So why does he do it at all? Why? Why does he do it? And to me, this is the question. It's not that the fact that, okay, I know tomorrow I'm going to have to do the same work again as today. The question is, why would I do it? And I think the answer to that is to understand that the human aspect of life is the rolling of the boulder. It's not getting the boulder out of your backyard, and it's not getting the boulder to the top of the hill. It's the actual rolling of the boulder is what makes us human. That's what life's all about. This painful, awful struggle that's the deal. That's the job. So yes, it's tough to be a conservative because everything wants to run downhill. And when you're talking about things like this, you have to deal with the fact that you're fighting against communists and rust and grass, and none of these things ever stop growing. But nevertheless, it does put you in an unenviable situation because we can never win. We can certainly lose. We can just stop. A garden, if it's not tended, will become a patch of weeds. But a patch of weeds, if it's untended, is not going to become a rose garden. Everything's working in one direction there. So this is the hand we're dealt, and we have to understand that it is the act of doing this that makes us human. Now, specifically with regard to this business about how, in terms of the politics of it, you now have to enter another moral equation of some kind, and then you get into the moral equation. Look, there's no question in my mind, none, that executive orders are overused, but if President Trump, the reason I agreed with President Trump making an executive order to make this clear is because I think that the god-awful Gordian knot mess of health insurance in this company is a bigger problem right now than overuse of executive orders. And so I find myself like one of these Marine medics in the Pacific who has got a natural inborn kind of a compassion and want to help people who are wounded, and I go up to Japanese soldiers to try to stop the bleeding, and the guy pulls a grenade and blows me up and two other corpsmen up. So now I have to do a second kind of an analysis morally and decide which one of these two awful choices is worse. And this is also part of life that we don't really fully understand, but it's like many, many times, in fact, most times, if there's a good choice and a bad choice, it's not a decision, right? I mean, no one makes a decision like that. Would I rather have ice cream or would I rather poke a fork in my eye? I guess I'll go with the ice cream on this one. That's not a decision. Decisions are made of the moral and ethical struggle that we have between something that we don't like and something that we don't like even more. And so the question then becomes, am I going to do something that I think is bad and take responsibility for doing that? Or do I do nothing and let something worse happen? And I'm a lesser of two evils is the lesser of two evils kind of guy. Personally.
Well, there seems to me, though, that at the heart of conservatism, there's a fundamental conflict that frustrates the very efforts that the movement is about, and that the Democrats, for whatever else you might want to say about them, at least grant unto themselves what Alexander Hamilton might call the energy and dispatch to accomplish that which they wish to accomplish. So the Democrats go into the enterprise of government and basically say, we want to aggregate unto ourselves the power to accomplish the things that we wish to do. The conservatives come into government saying, at least theoretically, and frankly, we don't see enough of the actual practice of this, but they come in basically saying, we want to strip ourselves of the power to accomplish that which we wish to do. And it just seems like it's fundamentally at conflict with itself, this conservative movement.
It absolutely is at conflict with itself, which is why this republic has lasted as long as it has. Because up until the point where we ignored the law, which really started in the 60s, got started to loosen up in the progressive era, turn of the last century. But anyway, when the people created the United States of America, created this republic, they created a republic that was essentially foolproof and tyrant-proof if the people were willing to obey the laws that they'd written and follow the structures that they'd set aside. And the circuit court ruling is a great example of that. Executive orders are a great example. Both of those are great examples of us getting off of the rails of how this is supposed to be done. And now we're tumbling off a cliff and we're trying to save as much of this train as we can, but we don't want to lose our souls doing it. So yes, and furthermore, not only do Democrats have an easier job in that it's easier to give away candy than it is to sell vegetables, even though everybody knows which one's good for you. But not only do they have that advantage, Scott, they have the advantage of this is where the best minds go. This is where their best and their brightest go. Progressives' best minds go into politics, law, and then politics. Conservatives' best minds go into engineering or the military or
business.
Business. business. And so we're putting our junior varsity team up against their NFL All-Stars. And on some level, our goal is to lose the game. It's thank God truth is on our side, or else we'd be in real trouble.
Well, a willingness to analyze our principles on a daily basis in the light of breaking news. That's what has made Bill Whittle now as popular as it has become with the members at BillWhittle.com who make it possible for this show to be produced and distributed. We're grateful to them for doing that. If you would like to join their ranks, you can do so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking the Become a Member link. And feel free to share these videos on YouTube liberally with your conservative friends. Ladies and gentlemen,
liberally.
Yes, classically liberally. Thus we will make progress. We thank you we thank the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott.